wants is to be near her. All he wants is to be with her. Being drawn into internet rumors and observing others speculate. While being aware of information they have chosen to keep private. However, they claim to have remained silent until the interview public debut. Until I don't know what happened, and I almost died started circulating without clarification. At that point, self-control gave way to rage. Because, from the speaker's perspective, it is not acceptable to suggest that a horrible event occurred and then subsequently act perplexed by it. You can't let the internet go wild while remaining mute about important issues. And that's when the tone becomes more acute. The voice becomes tighter. The intervals get shorter. The phrases arrive more quickly rather than emotionally under control. She asks, how could someone be unaware of what transpired, whether they were awake and with other people? This isn't anger. It's a colder, it's the sound of someone who feels deceived and thinks the facts have been twisted somewhat to create Tamar. The main problem with the whole affair was that you can't go around making media_storms that involve other people. By the end of this part, everyone else appears suspicious. The story has completely changed. This is no longer about a misunderstanding, a night out, or rumor. It's concerning accountability. Who controls the narrative? Who shares the story? And what occurs when quiet begins to resemble guilt? The same question looms. The same question looms over everything, even if increasing in volume every minute. Why does the tale constantly changing if the tone shifts as soon as the story passes the actual night? Sharper, heavier, and more purposeful once more. Because it no longer matters who sat next to whom or where people went. The focus shifts to what was stated later and why the speaker refrains from making hasty charges. Rather, they go back to the time the story became public. They talk about awakening to chaos, notifications, messages, and individuals posing queries that they were unable to respond to. It wasn't because they were concealing anything, but rather because, as they put it, they had no idea what Tamar was talking about. At that point, a misunderstanding turns the speaker claimed that the version Tamar started sharing online didn't correspond with what they had seen firsthand, which left them in shock. Additionally, the more Tamar talked, the more the narrative seemed to veer away from specifics and clarity and toward something purposefully ambiguous. She draws attention to the inconsistency between claiming she was on the verge of death and claiming she had no idea what had transpired. Everything revolves around that contradiction. The speaker focuses on it steadily, almost like a prosecutor presenting contradictions to a jury. How do you not know what occurred if you were on the verge of death? How are you ignorant of the circumstance if you were conscious enough to decline medical assistance? All you had to do was leave Funky alone, me and Funky cool, if you were awake, coherent. And say, because once you said, I woke up in a pool of blood, you had no desire to do that at all. After completing it, you removed it the following day. For example, and sure, there is a universe in which someone can say, well, and start a conversation. Everything was altered. Until I addressed it, the internet continued to function as usual. Go out and claim that she nearly died for the record, since they were aware that we had been together the previous evening. 7,000 people were waiting for me to explain what. Speculation erupted when I said, I don't know what happened to the lady that does. Everyone who had been in the same room that evening became a suspect as theories proliferated. The public court. Opinion. The speaker talks about seeing this happen in real time and seeing their own name appear in something they say. They were unrelated to each other. She describes how people started to doubt her function and why she was treated so contemptuously as that lady or whatever. And what you now know, what you don't know, is the reason I knew deep down that she hadn't happened to her app, which is why I was speaking of her with such contempt. She didn't say anything. This aspect of the story is unnerving because of restraint rather than rage. The speaker acknowledges that they had the opportunity to speak up right away, clear the air, and provide their side. But they chose not to do so because, in their opinion, this shouldn't have been a public spectacle. They thought Tamar would make everything clear. They thought the story would be changed. They thought the truth would ultimately surface without any harm. That was never the case. Rather, the narrative continued to expand. The quiet grew louder, the rhetoric more forceful, and the connotations deeper. At that point, the speaker claims to have realized something. Kujan. It wasn't by coincidence. It was practical because as long as no one revealed the truth, the focus remained on the enigma rather than the choices that preceded it. You are required to pay the speaker's fee. I don't require anything from you, and never required anything from you. Sincerely, I was your friend. The speaker then goes back to a crucial point, saying that the ride home and the car caused them to move away. They give a thorough, unedited, uncomfortable, yet neither dramatic nor graphic. There was a point when intentions were uncertain and boundaries seemed violated. At that point, they came to a decision. They stayed downstairs. They returned home not because they were envious or furious, but because they said that things didn't feel right anymore. She gives an explanation for her decision to stay outside. That choice becomes crucial to everything that transpires because the speaker emphasizes that whatever happens next happens after that. Without their presence, nevertheless, they were eventually drawn into the aftermath in some way. The speaker then discusses what was most painful. Not even the allegations, but Tamar's subsequent quiet. No phone contact, no explanation, no effort to stop. Rather, there were well-crafted remarks, interviews, and stories with just enough uncertainty to spark conversation. And becomes something. Nearer, the speaker acknowledges that they feel taken advantage of by betrayal, utilized as collateral while someone else was in charge of the story, as a backdrop or as a character in someone else's tale. She clarifies, Tamar remains silent, but she felt like the antagonist. The tone becomes more serious at this point because it is what transpired that evening. It has to do with accountability. The speaker makes it apparent that you have a duty to provide clarification if you're going to offer a serious suggestion. You cannot stand by and allow the harm to worsen while others conjecture. Nevertheless, it is precisely what took place. The internet went crazy. People took sides. Theories became accusations. By the end of this portion, the narrator claims that they were left standing by themselves, witnessing their name dragged into a circumstance they did not cause. One thing, it has nothing to do with jealousy. Clout is not at issue here. It has nothing to do with attention. It has to do with narrative control. About the power of quiet being equal to that of speaking. About how accusations might be less harmful than omissions. And how one meticulously constructed tale by the time the story reaches this point. The tension isn't coming from what's being said anymore, but rather from what hasn't been addressed. Kate can assign blame without ever naming names. And behind it all is the same unanswered question that no one seems willing to directly address. If the truth was so obvious and it made clear, stated that the focus is now on the consequences rather than Tamar's interview. The response, the fallout, the silent portion that happened in real time. The speaker makes it apparent that the night itself wasn't the most detrimental aspect of the scenario. Even if the internet was occupied with analyzing videos and making judgments, it was what transpired after they talked about seeing the story take unexpected turns, observing strangers use assumptions to fill in the blanks, observing their own name being included in discussions that seemed utterly far from reality, and to exacerbate the situation, elucidate the fact that none of it was necessary, because in their opinion, it might have been one straightforward declaration, one explanation, one acknowledgement, and one honest moment. Rather, quiet assumed control. And in such circumstances, being silent turns into a form of accusation in and of itself. The speaker explains how people started posing irrelevant inquiries. Messages poured in. The number of comments increased. Everyone was curious about what they had witnessed, what they knew, and what they didn't. Stating, however, the speaker maintains that they weren't being afraid. They were restraining themselves by holding back. They claimed that they didn't want to be the ones to reveal everything. They didn't want to make a difficult situation into a spectacle or reveal private moments. They thought the truth would ultimately surface on its own. However, something else took place instead. The story became more rigid. The narrative ceased to be and began to sound more like the speaker had already been done at that point, unfairly singled out, and how people here the tone has changed. More determined, less sentimental. Speaker starts drawing lines at this point. They never said they were aware of what transpired upstairs. They saw anything. Were hurt. They did make a straightforward claim. Additionally, they declined to accept accountability for something they were unable to see. However, the tale had off of its own. Distinction was irrelevant in the court of public. The speaker talks about seeing videos go viral in which Tamar talks about waking up hurt, disoriented and shaken, and witnessing people's emotional reactions without any context. Observing compassion turn into conjecture. And the story changed once more, slowly and almost imperceptibly. It was more than simply Tamar now. It wasn't only regarding uncertainty. It has to do with blame. The speaker creates a clear line at that point. They claim that if a severe incident had indeed occurred, the reaction ought to have been prompt, transparent, and appropriately managed. Authorities, medical experts, clear explanations, not ambiguous interviews, not cryptic remarks, not imaginative phrase that is provocative. This is where their voice becomes more frustrated because they find it hard to disregard the conflict, claim to have almost died, and add that you have no idea what you cannot suggest harm without preventing nation. You cannot allow people to nation. You cannot allow
the whole TikTok, the whole YouTube.
Even before the statement is said, the room becomes the kind of pause that hangs heavy is present. The kind where everyone is aware that a sharp object is going to fall. The camera lingers. The tone of the host changes. Then it appears as a confession rather than a shout. Frustrated but restrained warning. She claims she doesn't even know how to react to Tamar. Her tone was already strained. The moment is uneasy because of that indecision. Comes next isn't rumors. It's not a rumor. It's a gradual disintegration of a night that, in the speaker's opinion, should never have been made into a public spectacle. The interview had begun informally. Sitting across from Tamar from L'Oreal that talks about a drive, drinks, friends, a birthday, and a night out. On the surface, nothing dramatic. However, the moment she admits that she wakes up unaware of what, the energy changes. Felt strange. The internet leaned at that point. What happened between you and me was not what I wanted to happen. I didn't. Well, it's still not leaning forward right now. Clips started going viral in a matter of minutes. The audience rewound. Areas are filled in. Individuals were responding to what wasn't said rather than what was. The way a story about dinner and alcohol gradually began to seem like something completely different. The way facts didn't match. And the way answers were only partially correct. The reply did not come from a person who had been present. Someone who claims to have witnessed the entire evening. Someone who asserts that the current version is not merely false. It's intentional. You began by asking, "Are you aware of what actually happened to you?" "No, I'm not." Or are you able to discuss, "I don't know what actually happened to me, but I can talk about it." Not finished. Someone who had been silent up to that point. What transpired between us was something I never intended to happen. However, the slickness is in the tone shifts at that point. The voice becomes tighter. The annoyance becomes intimate. All of a sudden, the story is no longer about a party. It concerns who was present, who showed up late, who departed together, and who, in this view, had absolutely no right to be involved. Names begin to appear. Motions are an eatery. Everything up my way closed. I said. We could always go to Roof Chris, I remarked. Y'all said _ it. Come see me at Roof Chris. You guys and I met at Roof Chris. So, and you. Walking Mendeecees. And his homeboy enter. All right, this is the third time that you and I have spent time together in an unexpected restaurant. A different location, a vehicle ride, and a choice about whether or not to go upstairs. The sentence that caused the entire internet to freeze came next. They are the ones who know what occurred to you that evening. At that point, Specule meets us at Sauce. Y'all, I truly don't want to go, I remarked. I take my vehicle to Sauce. When I receive the sauce, Tamar said, are at her house, he says over the phone. Elation explodes, since this is now more than just Tamar. It goes beyond wounded sentiments and strained connections. It's about what transpired after the cameras were removed and why the narrative continues shifting. And in the middle of it all is a name that has no place in this circumstance. Mendeecees. The harm is already done by the time the interview is over. The internet has taken sides. One question is resounding everywhere, and accusations are flying. Seem to be hiding something if nothing happened. That's where the story really starts. The mood of the dialogue changes. The point at which the narrative shifts from Tamar's interview to what the speaker claims took place in the back. What had begun as a lighthearted story abruptly becomes heavy, but intensified, that has obviously been growing for weeks. The speaker is not in a hurry. They slow things down as though they're mentally recreating the night frame by frame and adjusting their perceptions. Was misrepresented. They start by contesting Tamar's account of what happened. She reiterates the assertion and challenges the notion that Tamar was unaware of what had occurred, about attending a friend's birthday. Claims that no birthday celebration was held in Tamar's honor, which is where the first crack comes. Nothing extravagant, nothing noteworthy, just a late-night choice that evolved into something very different. The speaker carefully lays it out. They clarify that the evening began informally, with individuals searching for a place to eat and making last-minute plans. Nothing out of the ordinary, no preparation, no purpose, just a group traveling from place to place like individuals do on a daily basis. Then there's the detail that keeps coming up. They were not allowed to leave the house. They were reluctant to leave. They were worn out. I didn't play it during the interview, but you mentioned that you nearly died when you woke up in a pool of blood. In this conversation with L'Oreal, when you said you were at home with David or someone else, they indicated you should give them a call. Nevertheless, they managed to move from one location to another. Further into the evening, she describes how their plans were altered, how they got to the restaurant, and who showed up out of the blue. The name drops land more heavily there, because the speaker claims that Yandy didn't just happen to show up. He entered with a nonchalant demeanor, as if it were prearranged and not at all unexpected. At that point, the tension changes from awkward to uncomfortable. The speaker explains that they had previously noticed anything strange, how their earlier encounters had already caused them discomfort, how a pattern was emerging. Faint, but when we returned to Tamar's house, we went upstairs with her despite our recurrent meets, coincidences, and careless timing. I assumed they wanted to be up there alone after she and Mendeecees had finished kissing in the back of that fucking automobile. I didn't go upstairs when we were dropped off at Tamar's place because of this. You didn't add up. So I got in my blasted car and drove home. They talk about observing the dynamic develop in real time. Body language, closeness, and familiarity that didn't fit the narrative. And the uncertainty only gets worse when the group finally departs. She describes being urged to get out of her car and go somewhere else. The narration slows down much further at this point. The camera waits silently, because the night divides into two versions at this point. The public was given one version, which depicts bewilderment, harm, and mystery. The other person who is being informed describes something quite different here, made the decision to go upstairs. The speaker claims that because the energy had changed, they purposefully left the environment. She describes what she saw in the car and why she didn't go upstairs. The inference weighs heavily. DC is on the left. Here's the thing, you see. I regret even choosing this course of action since it adheres to the heavy, which is powerful because it is strongly implied rather than explicitly stated or blamed. What transpired upstairs is not mentioned by the speaker. They claim not to have been present. They claim to have departed. They claim that they were uncomfortable. Then, if anything happened, they tell something that completely alters the story. Those who went upstairs would be aware. That's all. Just a line etched in the sand, no conjecture. No allegation. After then, the narrative shifts from narrating incidents to addressing motivation. Why is this how the narrative is told? Why now suggest confusion? Given that the night had witnesses, options, and well-defined decisions, why portray known? She discusses how the story being developed doesn't appeal to her. This is the point at which the annoyance overflows. The speaker explains how they feel pulled into a storm they didn't start, being portrayed as irresponsible, being consuming me while I'm just sitting there. I wish you all knew. I wish you all knew. What a terrible buddy he is. He's a terrible companion. Why didn't he accompany her upstairs if she was intoxicated? All that underscore wants is to be near her. All he wants is to be with her, being drawn into internet rumors and observing others speculate, while being aware of information they have chosen to keep private. However, they claim to have remained silent until the interview prior to Tamar's public debut. Until statements like, "I don't know what happened," and "I almost died" started circulating without clarification. At that point, self-control gave way to rage. Because, from the speaker's perspective, it is not acceptable to suggest that a horrible event occurred and then subsequently act perplexed by it. You can't let the internet go wild while remaining mute about important issues. And that's when the tone becomes more acute. The voice becomes tighter. The intervals get shorter. The phrases arrive more quickly rather than emotionally under control. She asks, how could someone be unaware of what transpired, whether they were awake and with other people? This isn't anger. It's a colder thing. It's the sound of someone who feels deceived and thinks the facts have been twisted somewhat to create Tamar. The main problem with the whole affair was that you can't go around making media underscore storms that involve other people. By the end of this part, everyone else appears suspicious. The story has completely changed. This is no longer about a misunderstanding, a night out, or rumor. It's concerning accountability. Who controls the narrative? Who shares the story? And what occurs when quiet begins to resemble guilt? The same question looms. Guilt. The same question looms. Over everything, even if no one has spoken, increasing in volume every minute. Why does the tale constantly changing if nothing happened? The tone shifts as soon as the story passes the actual night. Sharper, heavier, and more purposeful once more. Because it no longer matters who sat next to whom or where people went. The focus shifts to what was stated later and why the speaker refrains from making hasty charges. Rather, they go back to the time the story became public. They talk about awakening to chaos, notifications, messages, and individuals posing queries that they were unable to respond to. It wasn't because they were concealing anything, but rather because, as they put it, they had no idea what Tamar was talking about. At that point, a misunderstanding turns the speaker claim that the version Tamar started sharing online didn't correspond with what they had seen firsthand, which left them in shock. Additionally, the more Tamar talked, the more the narrative seemed to veer away from specifics and clarity and toward something purposefully ambiguous. She draws attention to the inconsistency between claiming she was on the verge of death and claiming she had no idea what had transpired. Everything revolves around that contradiction. The speaker focuses on it deliberately and steadily, almost like a prosecutor presenting contradictions to a jury. How do you not know what occurred if you were on the verge of death? How are you ignorant of the circumstance if you were conscious enough to decline medical assistance? All you had to do was leave Funky alone, me and Funky cool, if you were awake, coherent, and surrounded by pay, because once you said I woke up in a pool of blood, you had no desire to do that at all. After completing it, you removed it the following day. For example, and sure, there is a universe in which someone can